on, oh blissful music. For with every note you raise, my heart is filled with rapture, my soul is lost in praise.
Thank you. Be seated. Here's our text for the morning. We go back to Deuteronomy. God has spoken to Moses, and he has given him this instruction. So we pick up on the last verse in 31, and then I'll give you just the beginning in 32. And Moses recited the words of this song from the beginning to end in the hearing of the whole assembly of Israel. And here's the song. He is saying to them, don't forget this song. Remember your songs. Sing this song. I'm not going to be with you anymore. Sing this song. And here's the song. Listen, you heavens, and I will speak. Hear, you earth, the words of my mouth. Let my teaching fall like rain, and my words descend like dew, like showers on new grass, like abundant rain on tender plants. I will proclaim the name of the Lord. Oh, praise the greatness of our God. He is the rock. His works are perfect, and all his ways are just. A faithful God who does no wrong, upright and just is he. They are corrupt. Now he talks about the children of Israel, and the song is to them. They are corrupt and not his children. To their shame, they are a warped and crooked generation. Is this the way you repay the Lord, you foolish and unwise people? Is he not your father, your creator, who made you and formed you? Remember, always a key word. Remember your songs, restore your songs. Remember the days of old. Consider the generations long past. That's my whole life now. I taught for 35 years. I love teaching. But I love doing research with people who come now to my center at Pepperdine, and we just work through. They're working on a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation, or they're writing their congregational history. Remember the days of old. Consider the generations long past. Ask your father. Yeah, that's good. He'll remember what God did in the past, and he will tell you. Or your elders. Ask them. Ask the elders. They will explain to you. Now, the song goes on all the way to verse 43, 44, 45. But here's the theme of the song. God is faithful. God has always been faithful. God is just. God has always been just. Don't forget God. I can't go with you, but don't forget God. But now look at this from Psalm 137. This always haunts me. After the children of Israel have been captured and taken into captivity, the psalmist writes in Psalm 137, how can we sing the songs of the Lord in a foreign land? And we say that today. The foreign land we're living in is a secular culture. We're opposed everywhere. Who would have thought 25 years ago that there'd be 3 top-selling books in the New York Times bestseller list written by atheists and really taunting people of faith? People have enough money in London that they pay for big signs that go on the side of these buses, and all it says is, God is dead. You got enough money to pay for that? Where's the joy in that? This is the culture we live in. It's a foreign culture to us. We're not used to this. But one of the strategies of surviving this culture is to remember our songs. And our songs are about the faithfulness of God, who is always faithful. Even when we are in the toughest chapter of our life, going through the darkest dungeon, God is with us. And the psalmist says, how can we sing in a foreign land? But if you read the rest of this psalm, they did sing. If I don't sing, if I forget you, Lord, may my tongue cleave to the top of my mouth. Isn't that what it says? They did sing, even in a tough situation. And how does the story end? John goes up into heaven, the book of Revelation, and he says in chapter 15, I saw them around the throne of God, and they were singing. They were singing around the throne of God. They were singing the song of Moses. Isn't that interesting? In Revelation 15, he legitimizes Deuteronomy 32. He brings Deuteronomy 32 all the way up to Revelation 15. They were singing the song of Moses, comma, the servant of the Lord, as if they've forgotten who he is. They're singing the song of Moses, comma, the servant of the Lord, and the song of the Lamb, who, of course, is the risen Christ. Now, here's something I had forgotten. I'm going to confess, I just saw this recently. I didn't remember that right after he said that, he told us what they were singing. And here it is. This is Revelation 15:4. This is what he calls the song of Moses and the song of the Lamb. Great and marvelous are your deeds, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, King of the ages. Who will not fear you, O Lord, and bring glory to your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship before you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. That's what it means to sing the song of Moses and the song of the Lamb. Now, what hymn writer picks up on that in his chorus? Samuel Stinnett. Samuel Stinnett was a Baptist preacher in London whose grandfather had a church and whose father had a church. His grandfather didn't think the Sabbath had ever moved from Saturday, and they were called Seventh-day Baptists, and he preached for them on Saturdays. But on Sunday, he preached for his daddy's church. They believed that the Sabbath was now Sunday because Christ was raised on Sunday, and the church was established on Sunday. So he preached on Sunday for his daddy's church, but on Saturday, he preached for his granddaddy's church. But this great writer, Samuel Stinnett, who is buried in Bunhill Fields in London, not far from Isaac Watts' grave, not far from John Bunyan's grave, who wrote Pilgrim's Progress, all these great hymn writers buried there in Bunhill Fields in London, right across the street from John Wesley's house. And Samuel Stinnett is buried there, and he writes this great song, on Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. And then the chorus talks about singing the song of Moses and the Lamb. We're only going to do verses 1 and 4, but let's stand together and really belt this one out now.
On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. We will rest in the fair and happy land by and by, just across on the evergreen shore. Sing the song of Moses and the Lamb by and by, and dwell with Jesus evermore. Filled with delight, my raptured soul would here no longer stay. Though Jordan's waves around me roll, fearless I'd launch away. We will rest in the fair and happy land by and by, just across on the evergreen shore. Sing the song of Moses and the Lamb by and dwell with Jesus evermore.
Thank you, and be seated. John Bunyan was thrown in jail for his faith, but he spent 12 years in Bedford jail, and while he was there, he wrote Pilgrim's Progress. What a story. It's a shame that we have forgotten so much of it. In the 19th century, when I wrote my book on Christians on the Oregon Trail, I was surprised that everybody coming across the Oregon Trail had a copy of the Bible. That didn't surprise me. And a copy of Pilgrim's Progress. Every home had that. I mean, those were the two dominant books. And do you know the story of Pilgrim's Progress? The main character is named Christian, and he has decided to travel from the city of destruction to the celestial city. And he can't get his wife to go with him or his children or anybody else, but off he starts. and he has all kinds of troubles, and he runs into all kinds of people, and he picks up fellow travelers. One who goes with him all the way is named Hopeful, and they go to places like Vanity Fair. Our generation thinks that's a magazine. Vanity Fair is an important chapter in Pilgrim's Progress, and he is tempted by Vanity Fair, and he gets a little too close to it. But he's able to move on from Vanity Fair. But how imaginative of John Bunyan to talk about Vanity Fair, to give that name to the city that we live in, Vanity Fair, to do that in the 1600s. And then one night, Hopeful and Christian fall asleep on the grounds of a castle. And the castle has a name. It's called Doubting Castle. Oh, and who lives in Doubting Castle? There's a giant that lives there in Doubting Castle, and the giant's name is Despair. And Despair comes out of the castle, and he grabs Christian, and he grabs Hopeful. This is a Wednesday, and he throws them into the castle, and he beats them up, and he says to them, "You have no hope, no hope, no hope. Kill yourselves." And he shows them the bones of all the people who have died in Doubting Castle. And Thursday they're beat, and Friday they're beat, and Saturday they're just wishing for death. And then at midnight they move into the Lord's day. And Christian, touching his breast pocket, remembers that he had a key. He had a key, and the key, he pulls it out, and it's named Promise. He forgot about the promises of God, and he takes the key, and it opens the door, and they escape from Doubting Castle. Oh, you know all this story. I'm telling people who read this all the time, but what an imagination to be caught with all of your doubts and be beaten up by the giant who's called Despair, and then to escape. Oh, my. And to go through the valley of the shadow of death. How does the story end? Do you remember? They come to the Jordan. And the way it's pictured in Pilgrim's Progress is not what it looks like today if you've been to the Holy Land. But it's a raging river, and they look at it and they don't think they can get across. But they want to cross because there's Mount Zion, and they can hear them singing. They can hear the saints singing around the throne of God, and everything in them wants to get across this river, which is the metaphor in so many funerals I've preached for death. We use that all the time, the crossing of the Jordan into the Promised Land. And they go up and down the river trying to find any bridge, any way to cheat, any way to get through that river without dying. And they're trembling there. And we probably might tremble, facing death. What a dramatic moment. How many of our hymns take their cue from there? William Williams did, the poet laureate of Wales. "Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land." Verse 3, "When I tread the verge of Jordan, bid my anxious fears subside." Where's he getting that from? Pilgrim's Progress. He's getting that from this dramatic story that's in everybody's home, and they all read it. "Bid my anxious fears subside. Bear me through the swelling current. Land me safe on Canaan's side." Right? When did you hear that last? The royal wedding, of course. Why did Harry pick it? He said because it was sung at his mother's funeral. It was also sung at his brother's wedding. Will chose it. What is the song that binds together the mother and her two boys? It's "Guide me, O thou great Jehovah." And it was right at the end, people marching out, this dramatic song. And in the next day in all the papers, Harry wiping the tears from his cheek. He only cried that one time in the royal wedding. But they said it was the memory of his mother, this great hymn that means a lot to that family. I went back, it was 1986, Lori and I went over to Wales. I wanted to see the house where the poet laureate had lived, and I found it. And I got out of the car, and I sort of tiptoed over here. I just want to get a picture of where William Williams lived and wrote this hymn. And that 13-year-old girl came out, put her hands on her hips, and she stared at me, and I thought she was upset. We're getting tired of people coming here taking pictures of our house. And I said to her, "Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to get a picture here of the house." And And she said, that's not a very good spot. I said, well, what would be a better spot? And she said, well, everybody comes over here. And I went over there and I said, well, you're right. My goodness, oh, the house looks great here. And I said, do you get a lot of visitors? And she said, yeah. Like every month? Yeah. Like every week? Uh-huh. My goodness. Well, by any chance, are you a Williams? And she said, yes. The family still lives here? I mean, he was here in the 1700s. Do you happen to know what generation you are? Oh, she stood proud and tall. She said, 7. Your generation 7? And as soon as she said that, generation 6 came out the door. She'd been in the kitchen. She said, come on in the house. And I said, oh, I don't want to bother my wife. No, come in the house. So now we're going into William Williams' house, and generation 5 is sitting there. Grandma is there. Wow. So I went back. That was 1986. I went back 9 years later with my little film crew. And old Mr. Williams, I missed him that day. He'd been out farming. But he was there, and we brought our cameras in, and I was filmed inside the house interviewing Generation 6, Mr. Williams, who was descended from William Williams, the poet laureate, who wrote, Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah. You don't need to know any of that story, but it's going to be on the final exam in a moment when I hand out. But that's a great story. And when I went back 9 years later, that girl came, and by then, she was 13, so now she's 22, and she was married, and she introduced me to her husband, the girl that put her hands on her hips and said, that's not a good spot. Come over here and take your picture over here. Now, we'll remain seated on this one, but look at the words and look at verse 3, when I tread the verge of Jordan.
Guide me, O thou great Jehovah, pilgrim through this barren land. I am weak, but thou art mighty. Hold me with thy powerful hand. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want. Bread of heaven, feed me till I want no more. When I tread the verge of Jordan, bid my anxious fears subside. Bear me through the swelling current, land me safe on Canaan's side. I will never give to thee songs of praises. I will ever give to thee.
Beautiful. Come with me to the county of Devon. It's out in the west of England. The last 2 counties are Cornwall and Devon. It's 1803, and John Kent is huddled over his desk. He's been reading Deuteronomy 13. He's with us in this story that we're telling this morning. But he's got Pilgrim's Progress there, and he's reading that dramatic ending with Christian and hopeful. But he's wanting to write some poetry. He's trying to tie this together, the ending of Pilgrim's Progress and Deuteronomy 32. And he writes these words. On Zion's glorious summit stood. So here we are. On the other side of the river is Mount Zion. On Zion's glorious summit stood a numerous host. What did they have in common, the numerous host in heaven? They had all washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. They had all been baptized into the death of Christ, the burial, the resurrection. They had washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. On Zion's glorious summit stood a numerous host redeemed by blood. They hymned their King with strains divine. I heard the song and strove to join. That implies running. So hopeful charges into the river. They've got to do it. Christian knows he'll never see him again. You're going to drown. But Christian goes in, but before very long, Christian is underwater. He is thrashing about. It's not easy to die. But Hopeful is moving on a little bit ahead. And then, in a dramatic moment, Hopeful turns around, halfway across the Jordan, and he yells back, "Be of good cheer, my brother. My feet have touched the bottom, and it is sound." And he goes back and he helps Christian, and he lifts his head out of the water. He's got his hands under his chin. It's a great chapter there at the end. They can hear them singing. They can hear them singing. On Zion's glorious summit stood a numerous host redeemed by blood. They hymned their king with strains divine. I heard the song and strove to join. They make it to the other side, sopping wet. But now I picture them breaking into a run. They're helping each other up Mount Zion. I heard the singing, and I strove to join. Now, we need to sing all three verses. There's no way to cut this one apart like I've been doing. And we need to sing the Sanctus in the end. And it's powerful if we'll all stand and sing it. So, on Zion's glorious summit.
When we get to the last three holies of the song, let's hold it out longer than it's written and sing it softer and softer, punctuated with a moment of silence. Mm-hmm. On Zion's glorious summit stood a numerous host redeemed by blood. They hymned their king in strains divine. I heard the song and strove to join. I heard the song and strove to join. Hear all who suffer sore for true Lord Jesus, loving and shout victory now and hail the Lamb and bow before the great I am and bow before the great while everlasting ages roll, eternal love shall feast their soul, and scenes of bliss forever new, rise in succession to their view, rise in succession to their. Hold it good loud. God of hosts, I adore, who like me thy praise should sing, O Almighty King. God of hosts, I adore.
Thank you, Keith. I taught homiletics at Pepperdine for 19 years. That's the class on the preparation and delivery of sermons. And I enjoyed teaching how to preach. And one thing I did in every class at some point in the semester was to read the sermon that I thought was a sermon that had the greatest impact in the 20th century, based on how many times it was reprinted, how many times people shared it with somebody else, and now in today's world, how many times it shows up on Wikipedia. Every time everybody has used it. The preacher's name was Arthur John Gossip. He was from Scotland. He preached at Beech Grove Church, a free church of Scotland, conservative church. And life was pretty good. I think they had 4 or 5 children. He and Margaret, great marriage. And then on Wednesday, January 26, 1927, without any warning, she died. It happened so fast. He was not prepared. He was 52 years old, and he thought he had her for many more years to come. They had the funeral. I don't think he preached on January 30, but the next time he preached, which I'm pretty sure had to be February 6th, but he says in this printed sermon, this is the sermon I preached the first time I preached after my wife suddenly died. It was called, When Life Tumbles In, What Then? In our own fellowship, Batzel Barrett Baxter, who loved the sermon, wrote a whole book entitled When Life Tumbles In. He got Baker Bookhouse to publish it in Grand Rapids, Michigan. That was in 1974. I've talked with Batzel about how much we loved that sermon. I wish I could read parts of it. It's very raw. He just preached what he felt, and then when the church said, "Can we publish it and send it?" he said, "Okay." And then he was unprepared for how many letters came in around the globe. I'll just give you this brief line. In the middle of this sermon, he says, "I do not understand this life of ours." Oh, it's not this. I'm sorry. I'll get to that in a moment. "I do not understand this life of ours, but still less can I comprehend how people in trouble and loss and bereavement can fling away peevishly from the Christian faith. In God's name, fling away to what? Have we not lost enough without losing that too? You people," he says, looking at the congregation at Beech Grove, "you people in the sunshine, you who live in the sunshine, you may believe in the faith. But those who live in the shadows, we must believe it because we have nothing else." I went back to see Beech Grove Church at Aberdeen, Scotland years ago. Said to the church secretary, "I've come because of the sermon." She said, "Yeah, we're used to you." She said, "You're not the first and you won't be the last." And I said, "I don't want to be disruptive, but could I go in?" She said, "Yeah, I'll take you in." She took me up to the stage and she said, "I'll leave you alone with your thoughts." And she left and closed the door. It was a great moment. It was a powerful sermon, but I want you to see how he closed. So here's the first of the 2 slides. Here's how he ended. "I don't think," he says to his congregation, "I don't think you need be afraid of life. Our hearts are very frail, and there are places where the road is very steep and very lonely. But we have a wonderful God. And as Paul puts it, what can separate us from his love? Not death," he says immediately, pushing that aside at once as the most obvious of all impossibilities. "No, not death. That's not what separates us from God, not death. And look at how he closes from Pilgrim's Progress. Can you believe this? But his congregation knew these words well, and this has echoed down through the years. For standing in the roaring of the Jordan, cold to the heart with its dreadful chill, and very conscious of the terror of its rushing, I too, your minister, Arthur John Gossip, I too, like hopeful, can call back to you, who one day in your turn will have to cross it. All of you will have to die one time, like my wife just died. And I will call back to you, be of good cheer, my brother, for I feel the bottom, and it is sound. I close with this. Francis Rowley, preaching at the First Baptist Church in North Adams, Massachusetts, 1886, up northwest corner of Massachusetts. He'd never written a poem in his life, couldn't write a hymn to save his life. And his song leader, minister of music, Peter Bilhorn, said, Peter's only 21, and Francis was 32 at this time. He said to him, if you would write a hymn, I'll write the music for it. Well, great. I don't know how to write a hymn. But he decided that night he would try, and he went home to his study, the parsonage there at what was then number 24. I went to see that house. It's number 130 now. They've got all the numbering is different. But he was at number 24, and he wrote a hymn that night, and he sent it to Ira Sankey, the great Ira Sankey, who was the song leader for Dwight L. Moody. And Sankey said, this is a great hymn. But this line about can't we sing, that's wrong. It needs to be, I will sing, be positive. And with that one little tweak, he writes, I will sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me. And Peter Bilhorn writes this great music. I went back and talked to the church secretary. I walked down to the house. A man was coming out. There are 9 apartments there now. They've carved out 9 little apartments. And he was walking out, and he said, can I help you? He saw me taking a picture of his house. And I said, well, there was a great hymn written here in this house in 1886. He said, no kidding, what was it? And I said, I will sing the wondrous story. And he said, we sang that at church last week. And he turned around and looked at his house like it looked a lot better to him now. And when he left me, it looked like he was walking straighter, and proud. He lived in the house where Francis Rowley wrote, I will sing the wondrous story. Now we're going to close. This is how we'll end. And we're going to stand and sing it. And we're going to go right to that last verse. How long will God keep his promise? Christian found the key when he was in Doubting Castle, and it got him out. How long will God keep us? How long will he keep his promise? And Francis Riley writes, he will keep us till the river. That's how long he'll keep us. He will keep us till the river rolls its waters at my feet. Then he'll bear me safely over where the loved ones I shall meet. When I'm in a group of people and we're all sharing our favorite line from Christian hymns, that's the one I come back to. When I spoke on closing night at Pepperdine at the end of my career on May the 4th, 2012, when I no longer was going to direct the Pepperdine Bible lectures, I had done it for 30 years, I closed with this song. And I said to 5,000 people, I'm probably not going to see a lot of you anymore. I'm getting up there in years. So I'll say to you today the same thing. We may not run into each other anymore, but I'll leave you with this promise. I'll meet you at the river. Let's all stand together and sing our faith.
I will sing the wondrous story of the Christ who died for me, how he left his home in glory for the cross of Calvary.
Yes, I'll sing
the wondrous
story
of
the Christ
who died
for me.
The saints in glory gathered by the crystal sea.